Well, Jacalyn Duffin has spent a lot of time looking at how the Vatican evaluates reports of miraculous healings. She's the author of Medical Miracles, and she spent months in the Vatican Library poring over 1,400 files of reported healings. She was also once hired by the Vatican to investigate a reported miracle. Jacalyn Duffin is the Hanna Professor of Medical History at Queen's University, and she's in Kingston this morning. Hello.
Good morning.
Well, we'll get to that story in a minute, but I have to ask you first. You're a scientist, I'm told a lapsed Anglican, and a firm atheist. So what business do you have mucking around in this world of miracles?
Well, you might ask. I was asked more than 20 years ago to read a set of bone marrows. In other words, to do a consultation on a set of bone marrows from one person. These marrows had been taken monthly, roughly, over 18 months. And I was told that I could not be given any information about the case at all, just to read the bone marrows. So I immediately assumed it was for a lawsuit, and I read them very carefully and submitted my report. But the end of the marrows suggested that the patient was still in remission, even though she had had the most aggressive form of leukemia that we know. And I was a little perplexed by that. And as I handed in my report, I said, what is this, a lawsuit or a miracle? And it turned out that those bone marrows belonged to the woman whose healing was used in the canonization of Canada's first saint, Marie Marguerite Duville, back in 1990. So that experience as a hematologist led me to investigate as a historian what all the other miracles might have been.
And as a hematologist, as a scientist, do you believe in the kinds of miraculous cures that Brother Andre is being credited with?
After reading all these files, I have to say I do believe in miracles. And for me, the definition of a miracle is something we cannot explain. And that is what the Church is asking the physicians and scientists who participate. They're not asking them to say, this is a miracle. They're looking for a scientific explanation. And I think that things that we cannot explain do happen.
But it's a tough reconciliation, I'm guessing, is it?
Well, yes, I suppose to say you're an atheist who believes in miracles confounds some people. But I've learned that my medical colleagues who are a little disturbed by my interest in this subject think that somehow the Church is being duped by people who are pulling the wool over their eyes, or that the people might be lying. And I just cannot accept either of those interpretations. First of all, the people who come forward in the testimonies I've read are very sincere, and I don't think that they're lying. Second of all, the Church conducts very rigorous scientific investigations, just as Father Lachapelle told you a few moments ago. And what I noticed over the 4 centuries of miracles that I studied is that at any given moment in time, they invoke the most up-to-date science possible, and they also expect the patients to have had the best medical care possible.
Well, tell me a little bit more about this. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that the Church is actually invoking that kind of a rigorous scientific investigation. What is the process?
Well, yes, I was naive. I thought perhaps a miracle would be someone who eschewed medicine, who wouldn't go to the doctor. But in fact, they want the patients to have been seen by doctors, to have tried the best of human intervention. As some philosophical folk have told me, God works through human hands as well. And the witnesses, the physician witnesses, stand there as a third party to these interventions to attest to the fact that the illness was grave, or that the illness was not healable by our current methods of care. And not only do the treating doctors come forward, but expert witnesses beyond the treating doctors, and an entire panel of physicians, mostly Roman professors or other professors in Italy, who try to second guess the file to make sure that the people who are submitting it have not been duped or fooled. As a result, the records hold a lot of medical history and history of science.
But just because something can't be explained scientifically at this particular point, does that mean that a miracle has taken place? Have you come to accept that?
I have come to accept that science cannot explain everything, and either you say we don't know the answer, or you attribute it to something else you think you know. But what I have discovered from my medical colleagues who are skeptical, they believe that a natural cure will come along someday. And that is a belief, because they don't have evidence to say that a natural cure will come along. So in the moment in time in which we find ourselves, if the patient herself said, I prayed to Frère André, and Frère André interceded with God, and this is why I'm alive, that is a belief as well. And in a sense, after doing all this work, I realized that medicine has a belief system. It has a acceptance of certain truths, and I'm very comfortable with those truths, that there must be an actual explanation somewhere, but we haven't found it. And what we can do is deny it, or we can celebrate it.
You say this has taught you something about the evolution of medicine. What have you learned in your research?
Yes. Each file that I look at recognizes certain new inventions or concepts that appear in medicine. So tuberculosis was a very important disease to be healed in the 19th century. It was the number one killer. And that disease of the lungs required medical attention. So the stethoscope got invented around 1820. And I noticed that as soon as that happened, all the files following that date required the use of the stethoscope to confirm the diagnosis. Later in the century, bacteria were recognized, and then the Vatican required a culture, a bacteriological proof that tuberculosis was the diagnosis. Later, we got x-rays, and again, x-rays were required so that the standard of care was top-notch. In all of these files, that was what was demanded.
Mm-hmm. Take me back a little bit more and tell me some details of the case that was attributed to Marguerite Duville. Were you surprised when you learned what it was?
Yes, and I must say I'm still surprised that she is still alive, this person.
She is?
Yes, she is. And she too wanted privacy. This particular woman had a very aggressive form of leukemia. She went into remission following very difficult chemotherapy, but then she relapsed only 4 months later. And her relapse was also extremely difficult. She had more chemotherapy, and she went into remission again, which was very exciting for the caregivers at the time. But we hematologists generally expect that remissions will get shorter and shorter. So the set of bone marrows I read showed both of these things, but then it was remission. And I began to imagine that she must have died under care, and the doctors were perhaps being blamed for that death. But in fact, she had prayed during the relapse to Marie Marguerite Duville, and that is something also that Father Lachapelle mentioned to you, that you have to be able to document the appeal at the appropriate moment.
I'm going to have to stop you there, Jacalyn.
Okay.
Thanks so much. It does shake your faith as an atheist, I'm guessing, though.
Oh, yes, it does, and it makes me very happy.
Thanks so much for joining us today.
You're more than welcome.
Jacalyn Duffin is the Hanna Professor of Medical History at Queen's University. She's also the author of Medical Miracles.